Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the stars through the main window. The ship was humanity's newest deep space explorer, built to push the boundaries of known space. Jake had been captain for 3 years, and this mission was supposed to be routine. They were testing a new quantum drive system near the edge of human territory. "Captain, we're approaching the test coordinates," said Tony Walsh from his position at the navigation console. Tony was young but skilled, one of the best navigators in the fleet. His fingers moved quickly over the controls as he fine-tuned their position. "Good work, Tony. Lisa, how's our new drive looking?" Jake asked, turning to his chief engineer. Lisa Barnes was a brilliant woman who understood the quantum drive better than anyone. She had helped design the system back on Earth. "All systems are green, Captain. The quantum field is stable and ready for testing," Lisa replied, checking her instruments one more time. She had been worried about this test for weeks, but everything seemed perfect. Amy Chen looked up from the communication station. "No other ships in the area, Captain. We're clear to begin the test." Amy was responsible for keeping contact with Earth and monitoring all radio traffic in the region. Ryan Cole, the ship's security chief, stood near the back of the bridge. He was a former military man who took his job seriously. Even during a simple engine test, Ryan stayed alert for any signs of trouble. "All right, everyone, let's make history," Jake said with a smile. "Lisa, bring the quantum drive online." Lisa's hands moved over her console, activating the experimental system. The ship's lights dimmed slightly as power flowed into the new drive. Everything seemed normal at first. The quantum field indicators showed stable readings, and the drive was building power as expected. Then something went wrong. "Captain, I'm getting strange readings from the quantum field," Lisa said, her voice tight with concern. "The field is fluctuating in ways I've never seen before." "Can you shut it down?" Jake asked, moving toward her station. "I'm trying, but the system isn't responding," Lisa replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "The field is becoming unstable." Tony looked at his navigation displays and felt his stomach drop. "Captain, space around us is doing something weird. I'm seeing distortions that shouldn't be possible." Amy's communications equipment began making strange noises. "I'm losing contact with Earth. Something is interfering with all radio signals." Jake felt the ship begin to shake. Through the main window he could see space itself twisting and bending. A massive tear was opening in front of them, like a wound in reality itself. The edges of the tear glowed with strange colors that hurt to look at directly. "It's a wormhole," Lisa said, her voice filled with amazement and terror. "The quantum drive is creating an unstable wormhole." "Can we reverse course?" Jake asked. "No, sir," Tony replied, fighting with his controls. "The gravitational pull is too strong. We're being drawn in." The ship shook harder as it was pulled toward the wormhole. Jake grabbed the nearest console to steady himself. "Everyone hold on. We're going through whether we want to or not." The UES Horizon was pulled into the swirling vortex of twisted space. The crew felt their stomachs turn as gravity seemed to change direction several times. The lights flickered, and strange sounds echoed through the hull. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. "Report?" Jake said, checking that everyone was still conscious. "We're through," Tony said, looking at his instruments in confusion. "But these star patterns don't match anything in our databases. We're not in human space anymore." Lisa was already working to understand what had happened. "The quantum drive overloaded and tore a hole through space-time. We've been transported to a completely different region of the galaxy." Amy was trying to re-establish communications. "I'm not picking up any human signals, but there are other transmissions out there. Alien signals." Before anyone could respond, Ryan's voice cut through the bridge. "Captain, we have company. Multiple ships approaching fast." Jake looked at the main screen as Ryan brought up the tactical display. What he saw made his blood run cold. Massive ships were coming toward them, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. The smallest ship was 10 times the size of the Horizon. "Those aren't human vessels," Amy said quietly. "No kidding," Ryan replied, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. The alien ships surrounded the Horizon within minutes. Jake could see through the windows that they were sleek and powerful, with designs unlike anything in human engineering. They moved with purpose and precision that spoke of advanced technology and military discipline. "Captain, we're being scanned," Amy reported. "They're also trying to communicate, but I don't understand the language." "Try to establish basic communication protocols," Jake ordered. "Mathematical sequences, universal constants, anything that might work." Before Amy could respond, the ship shook again. "They're using some kind of tractor beam," Lisa announced. "They're pulling us toward the largest ship." Jake watched as they were drawn toward a vessel that looked more like a floating city than a spaceship. Docking bays large enough to hold dozens of ships like the Horizon were visible along its hull. The technology on display was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. "What's the plan, Captain?" Ryan asked, his military training making him think about defense and escape routes. Jake considered their options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely lost in alien space. Their quantum drive was damaged and they had no idea how to get home. Most captains might have panicked or prepared for the worst. Instead, Jake straightened his uniform and turned to his crew. "We do what humans do best. We adapt, we learn, and we survive. If these aliens wanted us dead, we'd already be floating in space. They want something, which means we have something to bargain with." "What could we possibly have that they would want?" Lisa asked. "I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Amy, keep trying to establish communication. Tony, see if you can learn anything about local space from their ship movements. Lisa, work on getting our systems back online. Ryan, stay alert but don't do anything aggressive unless they threaten us directly." The crew nodded and went to work. As the Horizon was pulled into the alien ship's docking bay, Jake felt a strange sense of calm. They were in the worst possible situation, completely at the mercy of unknown aliens with vastly superior technology. But they were still alive, still thinking and still working together. Whatever happened next, Jake was certain of one thing. The aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Humans had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and countless disasters throughout history. They had always found a way to endure and overcome impossible odds. These aliens were about to learn what that meant. The docking bay was enormous, filled with ships from dozens of different alien species. Jake and his crew were escorted from their ship by tall, armored beings with blue-gray skin and fierce yellow eyes. These were the Zephyrians, the rulers of this massive empire that controlled most of the galaxy. Admiral Kexmore was waiting for them in the docking bay. He was over 8 feet tall with muscles that looked like they could crush steel. His armor was decorated with symbols that showed his high rank in the Zephyrian military. When he spoke, his voice was deep and commanding. "I am Admiral Kexmore of the 3rd Imperial Fleet," he announced through a translation device. "You will identify yourselves and explain your presence in Imperial space." Jake stepped forward calmly. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel UES Horizon. We are explorers from Earth, and we arrived here by accident. Our experimental drive malfunctioned and created an unstable wormhole." Admiral Kexmore looked at the small human with curiosity. Most species either cowered in fear or tried to bluff when first meeting the Imperial fleet. These humans seemed neither afraid nor aggressive. They simply stood there, waiting to see what would happen next. "Humans," the Admiral repeated as if testing the word. "We have no record of your species. You appear to be very weak creatures. How did you develop space travel?" "Through cooperation and determination," Jake replied simply. "We may not be the strongest species, but we learn quickly and we don't give up easily." The Admiral was intrigued by this response. He ordered the humans to be brought aboard his flagship for the journey to the Imperial capital. The ship they boarded was called the Destroyer of Worlds, and it lived up to its name. It was a massive vessel with enough firepower to level entire planets. During the 3-week journey to Zeph Prime, the human crew continued to surprise their captors. The ship's environmental systems began failing on the 2nd day, threatening both human and alien crew members. Lisa Barnes quickly identified the problem as a cascade failure in the backup power grid. "Your systems are designed for maximum efficiency," Lisa explained to the Zephyrian engineers. but they have no redundancy. When one component fails, it brings down everything connected to it. The Zephyrian chief engineer, a being called Vextar, was skeptical. Redundant systems waste power in space. Only the strong survive. But what happens when the strong system fails? Lisa asked. She showed them how to modify their power grid with multiple backup systems and automatic switching. The changes not only fixed the current problem but made the entire ship 30% more efficient. Vextar was amazed. How did you know to do this? Human ships are built to survive damage, Lisa explained. We assume things will go wrong, so we plan for it. Everything has a backup, and every backup has a backup. Meanwhile, Tony Walsh was working with the ship's navigation crew. When their quantum compass failed during a hyperspace jump, the Zephyrian navigators panicked. They couldn't calculate their position without their advanced instruments. Tony calmly took out a simple calculator and began working with pen and paper. Using basic mathematics and the positions of distant stars, he calculated their exact location and the correct course to their destination. The Zephyrian navigators watched in amazement as he solved problems in his head that their computers normally handled. "How can you do such calculations without a machine?" asked the lead navigator, a being called Hexnal. "Human navigators learn to think like computers," Tony explained. "If our machines fail, we can still find our way. My grandfather was a sailor on Earth's oceans. He taught me to navigate by the stars using methods thousands of years old on my way." Chen impressed the communications staff when she managed to contact a mining colony that had lost contact with the fleet. The colony's communication array was damaged, and they were using weak emergency transmitters that the ship's advanced systems couldn't detect. Amy built a makeshift antenna using spare parts from the ship's maintenance bay. She then modified her equipment to pick up extremely weak signals. Within hours, she had re-established contact with the lost colony. "Your methods are so primitive," said the ship's communications officer. "Yet they work better than our advanced systems." "Sometimes, simple solutions are the best solutions," Amy replied. "Human communication started with smoke signals and drums. We learned to make contact no matter what tools we had available." The most impressive demonstration came from Ryan Cole. A group of young Zephyrian warriors, curious about human weakness, challenged him to a contest of strength. They expected to easily defeat the small human. Ryan accepted the challenge but suggested they compete in endurance rather than pure strength. "Anyone can be strong for a few minutes," he said. "The real test is who can keep going when everything hurts." The competition began with basic exercises: running, jumping, lifting weights. The Zephyrians were stronger and faster than Ryan, but as the hours passed, something strange happened. The aliens began to tire while Ryan kept going at the same steady pace. "How is this possible?" asked one of the warriors, breathing heavily. "You are so much smaller than us." "Human bodies are built for endurance," Ryan explained, still moving steadily. "Our ancestors were persistence hunters. We would chase prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We may not be the fastest or strongest, but we can outlast almost anything." One by one, the Zephyrian warriors dropped out of the competition. Ryan continued until he was the only one still standing. He wasn't trying to humiliate them. He simply refused to quit. Admiral Kexmore watched these displays with growing interest. He had conquered dozens of species in his long military career, but humans were different. They didn't rely on natural weapons or superior technology. Instead, they used intelligence, cooperation, and an almost supernatural refusal to give up. "Tell me about human warfare," the Admiral asked Jake one evening as they shared a meal in the ship's dining hall. Jake thought carefully before answering. "Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years. We learned that individual strength means nothing if you can't work as a team. The strongest warrior can be defeated by two weaker ones who coordinate their attacks. But surely your species has great warriors." Kexmore pressed. "We do. But our greatest military leaders weren't necessarily the strongest fighters. They were the ones who could inspire others, who could see weaknesses in the enemy's strategy, who could keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless." Jake told the Admiral about human history, about armies that won battles against impossible odds, about cities that refused to surrender even when facing certain destruction, about ordinary people who became heroes when their world needed them most. Your species sounds almost insane, Kexmore said, but there was respect in his voice. You fight battles you cannot win. Sometimes the only victory is refusing to be defeated, Jake replied. Even if we lose, we make sure the enemy pays a price for their victory. Eventually, they learn that conquering humans costs more than it's worth. As the journey continued, word of the humans spread throughout the ship. Crew members found excuses to visit the sections where the humans were working, curious about these strange creatures who seemed so weak yet possessed such incredible determination. The ship's doctor, a being called Nex Ward, was particularly fascinated by human physiology. Your bodies are so fragile, he observed while conducting medical examinations. Yet you heal quickly from injuries that would cripple other species. Human bodies are designed to survive damage and keep functioning, Lisa explained. We can lose blood, break bones, even lose limbs and still keep fighting. Our ancestors lived in a dangerous world where only the survivors had children. By the time they reached Zeph Prime, Admiral Kexmore had developed a grudging respect for humanity. These creatures defied everything he thought he knew about strength and survival. They were weak individually, but incredibly strong as a group. They had no natural weapons but had turned their intelligence into the ultimate tool. Most disturbing of all, they showed no fear of the mighty Zephyrian Empire. They were curious about alien technology and culture, but they never once acted like conquered subjects. They behaved as if they expected to be treated as equals. As the ship approached the Imperial capital, Kexmore wondered what Emperor Thexvar would make of these remarkable humans. The Emperor had ruled the galaxy for over 3 centuries and had never encountered a species quite like this one. One thing was certain, the humans were about to face the ultimate test of their strange strength. Zeph Prime was a world of incredible beauty and terror. Massive cities stretched across entire continents, connected by bridges that spanned oceans. The Imperial Palace rose from the center of the capital city, like a mountain made of crystal and steel. It was here that Emperor Thexvar ruled over billions of beings across thousands of worlds. The throne room was the largest chamber Jake had ever seen. It could have held a dozen football stadiums with room to spare. Representatives from hundreds of conquered species filled the vast space, all showing proper respect and fear toward their Zephyrian masters. Some bowed deeply, others pressed themselves flat against the floor, and a few trembled visibly in the presence of imperial power. Jake and his crew walked through the center of this gathering with their heads held high. They showed respect but not submission. Ryan walked with military precision. Lisa observed everything with scientific curiosity. Tony studied the architectural marvel of the chamber, and Amy listened to the dozens of languages being spoken around them. Emperor Thexvar sat on a throne carved from a single massive crystal that glowed with inner light. He was enormous even by Zephyrian standards, nearly 10 feet tall with muscles that showed he had been a warrior before becoming a ruler. His eyes were ancient and intelligent, holding the wisdom and cruelty of 3 centuries of absolute power. So these are the humans, the Emperor said, his voice echoing through the chamber, despite speaking normally. They are even smaller than, the report suggested. Admiral Kexmore stepped forward to make his report. Your Imperial Majesty, these creatures are unlike any species we have encountered. They show no fear of imperial power and possess unusual capabilities that compensate for their physical weakness. The Emperor leaned forward, studying Jake with the intensity of a predator examining prey. Most beings could not meet his gaze for more than a few seconds before looking away in terror. Jake looked back steadily, neither challenging nor submitting. I am Emperor Thexvar, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, the massive alien announced. You will kneel and acknowledge imperial authority over your species. Jake remained standing. I am Captain Jake Morrison, representing humanity. We respect your authority in your own territory, but we cannot kneel to anyone. It's not in our nature. A shocked silence fell over the throne room. No being had ever refused a direct command from the Emperor. Representatives from dozens of species watched in amazement and horror, expecting the humans to be instantly destroyed. Instead, Emperor Thexvar laughed. It was a sound like distant thunder, filled with genuine amusement. Interesting. Tell me, small human, what gives your weak species the courage to defy an empire that has conquered half the galaxy? We're not defying you, Jake replied calmly. We're simply being ourselves. Humans have never accepted that might makes right. We've spent our entire history fighting against impossible odds and finding ways to survive. The Emperor's expression grew thoughtful. He had ruled through fear and superior strength for centuries, but these creatures seemed immune to both. They weren't brave in the traditional sense. They simply couldn't be intimidated. Very well, the Emperor decided. If you will not submit willingly, you will prove your worth through the trials of supremacy. These trials have broken every species that attempted them. No alien race has ever completed all 3 trials and maintained their sanity. Murmurs of shock and fear rippled through the assembled representatives. The trials of supremacy were legendary throughout the Empire. They were designed to demonstrate why Zephyrian rule was inevitable and absolute. What happens if we succeed? Jake asked. That is impossible, the Emperor replied. But if somehow you did, humanity would be granted a treaty as equals rather than subjects. You would be the first species in Imperial history to receive such an honor. And if we fail, then you will join the ranks of the conquered, and humanity will serve the Empire as all others do. Jake turned to his crew. Lisa nodded. Encouragingly, Tony gave him a thumbs up. Amy smiled confidently, and Ryan simply said, "We're with you, Captain." "We accept your challenge," Jake announced. The first trial began immediately. It was called the Trial of Pain, designed to test physical endurance and mental strength. Jake was taken to a chamber deep beneath the palace where Zephyrian interrogators waited with devices that could cause unimaginable agony without permanent damage. The alien observers expected the small human to break within minutes. Most species couldn't endure more than a few moments of the specialized torture devices before begging for mercy or revealing any secrets they possessed. Jake had a different plan. As the pain began, he used meditation techniques he had learned from various Earth cultures. He separated his mind from his body, accepting the pain without fighting it or letting it control his thoughts. When the interrogators tried to make him reveal Earth's location or military capabilities, he recited poetry, mathematical equations, and childhood memories instead. Hours passed. The Zephyrian interrogators grew frustrated as the human continued to endure pain that should have broken him completely. He never screamed, never begged, never provided any useful information. He simply endured with a calmness that unnerved his captors. "How is this possible?" demanded the chief interrogator. "No being can resist our methods for this long." "Human warriors have been trained to resist torture for thousands of years," Jake explained between waves of agony. "We know that pain is temporary, but giving up information can harm people we care about. The pain will end eventually, but we'll have to live with betraying others for the rest of our lives." When Jake finally collapsed from exhaustion, he had endured longer than any creature in Imperial history. More importantly, he had not broken. The interrogators had learned nothing useful about humanity or Earth. The second trial was the trial of despair, designed to break the spirit rather than the body. Jake was placed in a chamber where powerful psychic projectors showed him visions of Earth being destroyed, his family dying, and humanity being enslaved by the Empire. The images were incredibly realistic and emotionally devastating. Most beings who witnessed such visions of their homeworld's destruction fell into complete despair and madness. They lost all will to resist and became completely submissive to Imperial authority. Jake watched the horrific visions with tears streaming down his face, but his response amazed the Zephyrian psychics conducting the trial. Instead of despair, he began planning. Even as he watched Earth burn in the projections, he was thinking about how humans would rebuild, how they would learn from defeat, and how they would become stronger. "Fascinating," observed the lead psychic, an ancient Zephyrian called Mexdor. "He grieves for his people, but he does not despair. How can this be?" "Because humans have been knocked down before," Jake replied, watching images of human cities being destroyed. "We've survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, Plagues that killed half our population and wars that lasted decades. Every time we thought civilization was ending, we rebuilt it stronger than before. The visions grew more intense, showing Jake's own crew members being tortured and killed. His heart broke as he watched, but still he did not despair. "You feel the pain," Mexdor observed, "yet you do not break." "Pain and loss are part of life," Jake said quietly. "Humans learned long ago that the only way to honor the dead is to keep living, keep fighting, keep building something better. Giving up dishonors their sacrifice." Word of Jake's performance in the trials spread throughout the imperial court like wildfire. Alien nobles who had spent centuries in comfortable submission began to whisper among themselves. If these small, weak humans could resist the Empire's ultimate demonstrations of power, what did that say about their own choice to surrender without fighting? The Emperor himself came to observe the final hours of the trial of despair. He watched as Jake maintained his sanity and determination, even while witnessing the apparent destruction of everything he cared about. It was something Thexavar had never seen in 3 centuries of rule. "Your species is either incredibly strong or completely insane," the Emperor observed. "Maybe both," Jake replied with a weak smile. "Humans have always been a little crazy. That's probably why we survived when stronger species went extinct." As the second trial ended with Jake still unbroken, the Emperor began to understand that he was dealing with something unprecedented. These humans represented a completely different kind of strength, one that couldn't be conquered through force or intimidation. The third trial would be the ultimate test. If the human could survive that, the Emperor would face a crisis unlike any in Imperial history. Representatives from across the galaxy watched and waited to see what would happen when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. The outcome would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The third and final trial was called the Trial of Isolation. Jake was taken to a special chamber deep beneath the Imperial Palace, a place designed to break minds through complete sensory deprivation and absolute loneliness. The chamber blocked all light, sound, smell, and even the sense of touch. Prisoners were left alone with nothing but their own thoughts until madness took hold. Most beings broke within hours. The strongest had lasted 3 days before losing their sanity completely. The Zephyrians expected Jake to follow the same pattern, but they had made one critical mistake. They had forgotten about his crew. "We're going with him," Lisa announced when the guards came to escort Jake to the isolation chamber. "That is not permitted," replied the guard captain, a massive Zephyrian named Gexthor. "The trial must be faced alone." "Then we refuse to let our captain take the trial," Ryan said firmly, stepping beside Lisa. Tony and Amy joined them, forming a protective circle around Jake. "Where our captain goes, we go," Tony declared. The guard captain was confused. In all the centuries of Imperial rule, no one had ever volunteered to share in the trials. The concept of loyalty that's strong was completely alien to Zephyrian culture, where only individual strength mattered. Emperor Thexvar was informed of the situation. He came to see for himself, bringing his most trusted advisors with him. What he found was the 4 human crew members standing firmly together, refusing to abandon their captain even when facing certain mental destruction. "Explain this behavior," the Emperor commanded. "Humans don't abandon each other," Jake said simply. "These people are my crew, my responsibility, and my friends. I won't let them suffer for my choices." "But they choose to suffer anyway," observed the Emperor. "They could return to their ship and wait safely while you face the trial alone." "No, sir," Lisa said respectfully but firmly. "That's not how humans work. We succeed together, or we fail together." The Emperor was fascinated by this display. He had conquered hundreds of species, but none had ever shown this level of group loyalty. Most aliens would abandon their leaders when facing imperial power, choosing personal survival over group unity. "Very well," the Emperor decided. "If you insist on sharing the trial, you may do so, but know that it will likely destroy all of your minds." The 5 humans were placed together in the isolation chamber. Complete darkness and silence surrounded them. There was no sense of time passing, no external stimulation of any kind. It was a place designed to drive thinking beings insane through absolute nothingness. But something unexpected happened. Instead of descending into madness, the humans adapted to their situation. They couldn't see each other, but they could hear each other breathe. They used this to stay connected and maintain their sanity. Lisa started by reciting the periodic table of elements, her voice steady in the darkness. When she finished, Tony began describing the star patterns he had memorized during his navigation training. Amy followed by singing songs from Earth, her voice providing comfort and familiarity. Ryan told stories from his military service, focusing on times when his unit had worked together to overcome impossible odds. Jake shared memories of his childhood, his family, and his dreams of exploring the galaxy. They created games using only their voices and memories. They solved mathematical problems together, with each person contributing their expertise. They planned improvements to their ship, discussed scientific theories, and even held philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and reality. The Zephyrian psychics monitoring the trial were amazed. Instead of breaking down in isolation, the humans were becoming stronger through cooperation. They were turning their greatest weakness, being trapped together, into their greatest strength. "How is this possible?" asked Mexdor, the lead psychic. "Complete isolation should drive them insane within hours." "They are not isolated," observed another psychic. "They are together. Their minds are connected in ways our science cannot measure." Days passed. Outside the chamber, word spread throughout the Imperial Palace and beyond. The human crew was not only surviving the impossible trial, they were thriving. Representatives from conquered species began to gather, hoping to witness something that could change their understanding of strength and survival. Admiral Kexmore found himself thinking about conversations with Captain Morrison. The Admiral had spent his career believing that only individual power mattered, but the humans were proving that cooperation could be more powerful than any weapon. Inside the chamber, the humans continued their mental exercises. They shared every memory, every piece of knowledge, every experience they had. They became closer as a crew than they had ever been before, understanding each other on a level that few beings ever achieve. "You know," Jake said during what might have been the third day, "I think this is the most interesting conversation I've ever had." "Even though we're probably going insane?" Lisa asked with a laugh. "Especially because of that," Tony replied. "When else would we have time to really talk about everything?" "I'm learning things about you people I never knew," Amy admitted. "Ryan, I had no idea you wrote poetry." "Military secret," Ryan replied with mock seriousness. "Can't have the enemy knowing we're sensitive." Their laughter echoed in the darkness, a sound of pure human joy that the monitoring equipment couldn't understand or analyze. On the fifth day, something unprecedented happened. Other prisoners in nearby isolation chambers began to respond to the sounds of human conversation and laughter. Beings who had been driven insane by solitude started showing signs of recovery as they listened to the humans interact. The Emperor himself came to observe this phenomenon. Through the monitoring systems, he could see that the humans were not only maintaining their sanity, they were actually helping other prisoners regain theirs. "They are healing minds that we broke," whispered one of the Imperial doctors. "Their presence is reversing damage we thought was permanent." Emperor Thexfar stood in silence, contemplating what he was witnessing. These humans represented something that challenged every assumption his empire was built on. They were proving that strength could come from unity rather than dominance, that weakness could become power through cooperation. After a full week in isolation, the humans were removed from the chamber. They emerged not broken or insane, but stronger than before. They had used the trial to deepen their friendship and understanding of each other. What was meant to destroy them had actually made them more unified. The Emperor faced a crisis unlike any in Imperial history. The humans had completed the impossible trials, but their victory was creating problems throughout his empire. Conquered species were beginning to ask questions they hadn't dared voice in centuries. If humans could resist Imperial power, perhaps resistance was possible. If these small, weak creatures could maintain their independence through simple determination, what excuse did stronger species have for their submission? Reports were coming in from across the empire. Conquered worlds were experiencing their first acts of defiance in generations. Workers were organizing protests, local governors were questioning orders, and some species were demanding the same treatment the humans had received. The Emperor knew he could not simply execute the humans. They had won their trials fairly, and doing so would make them martyrs that could inspire galaxy-wide rebellion. But allowing them to leave unchanged would admit that imperial power had limits. There was only one solution: a final test that would settle the matter once and for all. The Emperor would face Captain Morrison in single combat winner-take-all. If the humans somehow won, humanity would receive unprecedented privileges. If the Emperor won, as he certainly would, the humans would accept imperial rule. Jake accepted the challenge without hesitation, knowing he could not possibly win through strength or skill. But he had learned something important during the trials. Sometimes victory wasn't about winning, it was about refusing to be defeated. As he prepared for what seemed like certain death, Jake felt no fear. He had his crew beside him. He had done his duty to humanity, and he had proven that humans could not be broken by force or intimidation. The final confrontation would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of the entire galaxy. The combat arena in the Imperial Palace was a massive circular chamber, with viewing platforms that could hold thousands of spectators. Representatives from every corner of the Zephyrian Empire had come to witness this unprecedented event. Single combat between the Emperor himself and a small human captain. Emperor Thexvar stood in the center of the arena, wearing ceremonial armor that had been crafted from the metals of conquered worlds. He was a giant among giants with 3 centuries of combat experience and strength that could crush stone. His weapons were works of art, a sword that could cut through starship hull plating, and a shield that had never been penetrated. Jake Morrison looked tiny in comparison. He wore his simple ship's uniform and carried only standard human weapons, a combat knife and a basic plasma pistol. To the alien observers, it looked like a child preparing to fight a monster. "This is madness," Lisa whispered to the other crew members as they watched from the viewing platform. "The captain can't possibly win." "He's not trying to win," Ryan replied quietly. "He's trying to make a point." Admiral Kexmore stood nearby, his expression troubled. Over the weeks of traveling with the humans, he had developed a respect for their capabilities. But this was different. This was raw physical combat where human cleverness and determination might not be enough. The Emperor raised his sword in salute. "Captain Morrison, I respect your courage. But this battle has only one possible outcome. Surrender now, and I will grant humanity a quick and honorable place within the Empire." Jake drew his knife and pistol, taking a defensive stance. "Your Imperial Majesty, with respect, humans don't surrender. We might lose, we might die, but we don't quit." The battle began with the Emperor's first attack. He moved with surprising speed for such a large being, his sword cutting through the air where Jake had been standing a split second before. Jake rolled aside, firing his pistol at the Emperor's armor. The plasma bolts splashed harmlessly against the ceremonial plates, but Jake hadn't expected them to penetrate. He was studying his opponent, learning the Emperor's fighting style and looking for weaknesses that might not be obvious. The Emperor attacked again, this time with a series of precise strikes that drove Jake backward across the arena floor. Each swing of the massive sword created wind that knocked Jake off balance. It was clear that raw strength and reach gave the Emperor an overwhelming advantage. But Jake had learned something important during his military training. Sometimes you can't win by playing your opponent's game. Instead of trying to match the Emperor's strength, Jake focused on speed and endurance. He stayed just out of range of the sword strikes while looking for opportunities. Minutes passed. The Emperor's attacks were devastating but predictable. Jake began to see patterns in the alien's fighting style. The Emperor had centuries of experience, but most of his opponents had probably tried to match his strength directly. Jake was doing something different. "You fight like prey," the Emperor observed. breathing slightly harder after several minutes of combat. Running and hiding instead of standing and fighting. "I fight like a human," Jake replied, dodging another sword strike. "We learned long ago that the hunter doesn't always win." Jake's pistol was empty, so he discarded it and focused entirely on his knife. The blade was tiny compared to the Emperor's sword, but it was faster and more maneuverable. Jake began darting, in for quick strikes at joints in the Emperor's armor, then retreating before the massive alien could respond. The cuts were small, barely scratches, but they began to add up. More importantly, Jake was forcing the Emperor to work harder for each attack. The human's superior endurance began to show as the larger alien started breathing more heavily. "Impossible," muttered one of the alien observers. "The human is too small to threaten the Emperor. Look more carefully," Admiral Kexmore replied. "The human isn't trying to kill the Emperor quickly. He's wearing him down." The battle continued for over an hour. Jake took several serious wounds from glancing blows of the Emperor's sword, but he kept moving, kept fighting, kept looking for opportunities. His knife found more gaps in the armor, and small streams of blue blood began to show that even the mighty Emperor was not invincible. Emperor Thexvar was beginning to understand what he was facing. This human couldn't match his strength or reach, but the small creature simply would not give up. Every time Jake was knocked down, he got back up. Every wound he received only seemed to make him more determined. "Why do you continue?" the Emperor demanded during a brief pause in the fighting. "You cannot win this battle." Jake wiped blood from a cut on his forehead and smiled grimly. "Because that's what humans do. We keep fighting until the very end. Even if we can't win, we make sure you remember us." The Emperor felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: uncertainty. He was clearly winning the battle, but the human's refusal to accept defeat was having an effect he hadn't expected. Around the arena, alien spectators were watching, with growing amazement as the small human continued to fight against impossible odds. Representatives from conquered species were beginning to whisper among themselves. If this tiny human could stand against the Emperor himself, what excuse did they have for their own submission? The sight of someone refusing to be defeated was awakening feelings that had been suppressed for generations. The battle reached its climax when the Emperor managed to land a solid blow with the flat of his sword. Jake was sent flying across the arena floor, his knife spinning away into the distance. He landed hard against the wall and slumped to the ground, clearly defeated. The arena fell silent. Emperor Thexvar walked slowly toward his fallen opponent, sword raised for the final strike. Everyone expected the human to beg for mercy or at least acknowledge defeat. Instead, Jake struggled to his feet. Blood ran down his face and his left arm hung useless at his side, but he raised his right fist in a defensive position. He had no weapons, no armor, and no chance of victory, but he was still fighting. "Yield," the Emperor commanded. "You have fought with honor, but this is over." "No, sir," Jake replied, swaying slightly but still standing. "As long as I can stand, I can fight." The Emperor stopped, his sword inches from Jake's throat. In 3 centuries of rule, he had never encountered anything like this. The human was clearly beaten, obviously outmatched and certainly going to die, but he absolutely refused to surrender. Something profound shifted in that moment. Emperor Thexvar looked at the small, wounded human who stood defiant in the face of certain death, and saw something he had forgotten existed: true courage. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to continue despite fear. The Emperor lowered his sword. "I declare this combat ended," he announced to the stunned arena. "Captain Morrison has proven that humanity possesses a strength that cannot be conquered through force." Jake remained standing, not quite believing what he was hearing. Around the arena, thousands of alien spectators sat in shocked silence. "Captain Morrison," the Emperor continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive chamber, "I offer humanity a treaty as equals. Your species will be granted full diplomatic status within the Empire, with the right to maintain your independence and govern your own worlds." The arena erupted in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began demanding the same treatment. The sight of the humans' refusal to surrender had awakened something that imperial power couldn't suppress, the desire for dignity and freedom. Jake accepted the treaty on behalf of humanity, but added conditions that shocked everyone present. Any species within the Empire that wishes to join our alliance must be allowed to do so freely, and the Empire must agree to resolve future disputes through negotiation rather than conquest. The Emperor agreed to these unprecedented terms. He had learned that some things could not be taken by force. Respect had to be earned, loyalty had to be chosen freely, and true strength came from the willingness to stand up for principles, even when facing certain defeat. The UES Horizon departed, Zeph Prime with full honors, but their real victory was just beginning. News of humanity's resistance spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had been conquered centuries ago began to remember what freedom looked like. Admiral Kexmore requested a transfer to diplomatic service, becoming the Empire's first ambassador to humanity. He had learned that there were different kinds of strength, and that cooperation could be more powerful than domination. Emperor Thexavar found himself ruling a changed empire. The old system of rule through fear was giving way to something more complex. A galaxy where strength was measured not by the ability to conquer, but by the willingness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Jake and his crew returned to human space as heroes, but their greatest achievement wasn't their survival. They had planted the seeds of an idea that would reshape the galaxy. That true strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the refusal to be destroyed. The accidental breach that had brought humans into contact with the Zephyrian Empire had started a transformation that would echo across the stars for generations. Humanity had entered a galactic empire by mistake, but they hadn't flinched. In doing so, they had changed everything.